We're so fortunate that Aviva Siegel could be here today with us. Welcome to this fireside chat. You already heard a little bit about her history. She'll get into more in just a minute. But we're just going to talk for like 25 minutes, and then we'll have 15 minutes of question and answer. So start thinking of questions you want to ask that maybe you're curious about or might be important or help move things forwards towards getting the hostages freed. Also be prepared maybe to hear some information that could be uncomfortable to you. Special thanks to the Hostages and Missing Families Forum for their tireless work on behalf of freeing the hostages and for bringing Aviva here. And you'll hear more from Matan Sivik at the end. And also thanks to Laura Griff, not just because she's my wife, but she's had an integral role, as you know, in encouraging and organizing our amazing Adat Shalom community since October 15th of last year, 1 week after the event. Over 100 Adat Shalom members have attended the weekly vigils that Unacceptable has organized outside of the White House, sometimes in collaboration with the forum. And there might even be some people from Unacceptable here. And we've also been to many marches and protests to support the hostages and their release and to keep the issue on people's minds. So let's get started, Aviva, with kind of the setting, you know. Can you start by telling us how you even arrived at Kfar Aza, near Gaza, near the Gaza Strip, and just give people the setting?
Can you hear me? No?
I think it has to be within 3 inches, yeah.
Okay, can you hear me? That's better. So Keith and I met on Kibbutz Gezer 45 years ago, a long time ago. We've been married for 43 years. And I've always been a kibbutznik, lived on a kibbutz. I lived on Kibbutz Tzorah. And I came to Israel when I was 9 years old from South Africa as a Ola Chadasha. That's many, many years ago. That's where my accent comes from, and I'm happy that I know English, that I can talk for Keith in United States. And Keith and I met and fell in love in a second because Keith is the most sweetest person in earth. He's just, not only the way he looks, the way he spoke, and he's just such a gentle person that makes you feel like you want to be with him and you want to talk to him. So he's really just a people person. Everybody loves him so much. And we moved to Kibbutz Kfar Aza. We looked for a kibbutz that was younger than Kibbutz Tzorah. And we made the wrong decision to move there because Kibbutz Kfar Aza is very, very close to Gaza. And we've really suffered not only from the 7th of October, but we've been suffering for years and years and years from the rockets. And I remember the beginning when it all started, and I said to Keith, it's not for me. I'm scared. It's not for me. I'm worried about my kids. We've got 4 children. And we used to hide in the bathroom when the missiles used to come from Gaza. I mean, like more than 20 years ago. I used to find myself hiding behind trees and seeing the rockets in front of my eyes, like fall not far away from me. And for years, I used to try and tell Keith that it's not for me. I got my mom to be on my side and say, Keith, we have to leave. We can't stay here. And Keith used to say, no, we're going to stay here. We're going to look after the border. And everything will be okay. You'll see. We'll get used to it. So we did get used to all the rockets. And we didn't get used to the 7th. That was just too much.
Yes, well, that's the next step, I guess, maybe in just explaining your experience. What was it like on October 7th for you and your family?
I'll just say a couple of words about Kibbutz Kfar Aza. It's a community about of 950 people. And I know most of the people that live on Kfar and 64 people were murdered on the 7th in such a brutal way. There were 2 kids that hid themselves in a cupboard while their mother was dead in front of them, and they killed the father outside. There were 2 babies, 9 months old, that were in the same crib, and they killed both parents, and they were alone for 17 hours. And there was a family that was hugging on a bed and shot. There were families that were burnt alive. There were people that were shot through the door or the window while other people from the family just watched them dying. Kids that watched their mothers die in front of their eyes and had to wait for them to be taken out after hours. So my community really went through a lot. And it all happened on the 7th of October. And for the first 2 rockets that came, I didn't think that everything's different. It just seemed like we used to it. We ran to our little shelter. We didn't even close the door. We didn't close the window because we don't have time. Kfar Aza, when you hear the Tzeva Adom, the alarm that goes on, normally there's no time, no seconds even. So we just run. And like so many times, I'm there and Keith hasn't arrived yet. Okay, I'm coming. And it's fallen already, or we've heard the explosion already while Keith hasn't even arrived. So this time, Keith and I arrived very quickly to the little shelter that we have in the house. And after 2 of the missiles that came, we thought it's finished because we're used to it. So we stepped out, and from the window from the room next to the shelter that we have, the little shelter, it's in the room, in the house, we could see through the window all the rockets that are going all over to Israel in every direction. And we knew we knew already, so we could see that some of them are going to Tel Aviv. And then a second later, we were in a little shelter, locked the door, closed the door and closed the window, didn't lock them. And we were sitting there, and I remember looking at Keith and asking myself and asking him, what's happening? It sounded like the end of the world. It was just like whistling from all the, it's like whistles when it leaves, and you can hear it before it whistles and goes out. It sounded like the end of the world. And I started shaking. Keith tried to relax me down. Don't worry, we're okay. And then we get this message on a WhatsApp group from Kibbutz Kfar Aza of a lady, and she said that she hears noises that we've never heard before. And that was the Hamas terrorists killing people already. So it was very shortly after it started. And nobody, unfortunately, nobody told us what to do from Kfar Aza, because Dorit Kislev, the girl that normally sends everybody messages, she was killed. And then, maybe 5 minutes later, we get a message that Ophir Lipstein, somebody from Kfar Aza, was killed. And I'll never forget that moment. I think my heart dropped. I didn't feel my body. I was in a shock, a complete and utter shock. Until then, I could handle it because, you know, I thought the door and the window will be locked and we'll be okay. But to think about somebody being killed, it just was too much for me to handle. So we tried to figure out where to sit in the shelter, that if they shoot through the window or through the door, then it won't hit us. So Kit locked the window and he locked the door and he said that we're safe. I looked at him and I didn't feel safe because it was so noisy. And we sat there for 4 hours. And some stage I asked my family what's happening in Israel, because we were disconnected from internet and nobody answered. So I just asked my sister a couple of weeks ago, why didn't you tell us what's happening? And she looked at me and she said, I just couldn't because it looked so bad. And my daughter wrote to us that we're the strongest people in earth. And that sentence went straight into my heart. And I understood by that sentence that something really, really bad is happening. And About an hour before we were kidnapped, we started hearing Arabic outside, and my son, Shai, was on the kibbutz, and he wrote to us that he can hear the Arabic from outside, and he's holding his fingers, and we got disconnected from him. So we heard them shooting the house. We heard them walking inside, the steps, walking in, and they just opened the door like any other door. 15 terrorists tried to shove themselves inside to see who they caught this time. And what saved our lives is Keith put his head on his knees and his hands on his head. I stood up and screamed like I've never, ever screamed. I don't think that you know, that anybody in this room knows that people can scream like I screamed, because it came from inside my body. And we were taken in just such a brutal way. They tore Keith's shirt, pushing him and pulling him. They pushed him and broke his ribs, and they shot us. I've got shotguns in my floor, in my house. I was lucky, but Keith wasn't. He got shot in his hand, and I was the only one that took care of Keith. And off we went in Keith's car to Gaza, with a terrorist with a knife in front of my face and a gun in front of Keith, and I faced the terrorist that sat in the front. And we were in Gaza in 2 seconds. Very, very close.
That is so intense. Yeah, we can take a sip of water or figuratively. That was very intense, and we can all take a sip of water or something literally or figuratively. A breath. So you're driving you're being driven in your car, and you're going to this place, and had you been to Gaza before?
You know, nobody's ever asked me that. And I like that question because Keith and I, when we decided we're going to Gaza, to live there 41 years ago, before we moved there, we were invited to come and see the kibbutz. And I'm looking, and I can see that, it just doesn't look like Israel. It looked like some place that I've never been in, like maybe 200 years ago, with like cars that look different, people that look different. And then we figured out that we're in Gaza. And Keith said, oops. So he got out the car, and I locked the door, sitting inside the car, was scared that somebody would come to the car. And Keith's walking around in Gaza to find somebody to tell him, to ask him, how do we get out of here and how do we get to Kfar Aza? And he found somebody that was working on a tractor, and he's there, and I'm watching, talking to somebody from Gaza. I was shaking in the car. And that was the only time I was there. I wasn't supposed to be there. But I remember that in the entrance of Gaza, there were like two soldiers sitting, and they were just talking to each other. They didn't even see us going in or tell us that we're going into Gaza. So it's not like that now.
Right. All right, so, but you had been there, but it's like you didn't really understand the place. It was just another place, a foreign land that was right next to you. And now you're being driven there as under duress.
Yeah.
And so they drive in, and they seem to know where they were going, a destination specifically.
I was in a complete and utterly shock. I think that I wasn't really on earth, while Keith was. And Keith wanted to run away. He was saying, we need to run away. They're going to take us to Gaza. Even though we were in the car with the knife in front of my face and the gun in front of our faces. And he was going on that we need to run away. And I just said, Keith, don't worry. It's okay. We're going to see Gaza. And I remember saying that. And, it sounds strange, doesn't it, that I said that? But I can tell you guys that I wasn't on earth. I'm sorry. I just wasn't on earth. And then when we arrived to Gaza, I think like every minute I asked myself, what am I doing in Gaza? What is Keith doing in Gaza? We were in our pajamas. What are we doing in Gaza? You don't understand. it's hard to understand. Why? What are we doing at Gaza? And we arrived to Gaza. While on Kfar Aza, we saw lots of terrorists like walking around on the grass and houses on fire already, so we knew that things were happening. And we arrived and we saw lots and lots of families waiting outside the houses, clapping their hands, shooting in the air, shouting Allahu Akbar in Arabic, and welcoming us. While I was shaking, Keith was shaking, we wanted to scream, what are we doing here? And so they knew that we're coming. And then we come to a house with a couple of stairs, the door opens, and some terrorists welcome us in a way with a smile, happy. It's a holiday for them. And then we walk 4 steps, and I look down, and this terrorist underneath the ground smiling at me and saying this, that I need to go down. I was shaking, the ladder was shaking with me. And I remember I turned around to Keith and I said, Keith, I'm going down first, you look after me. At the end, I looked after Keith, because what happened when you go down, it's very narrow and it's dark, and the arches, some of them are very, very low, so you have to bend, and you can't really see because it's so dark. So I banged my head a couple of times to tell Keith that he must bend down. And then I hear Keith say, "Aye!" And I said, "Keith, but I told you to bend." So that's what it looks like. It's terrible. It's just the worst place to be in. We arrived to a little arch that's open, small, the size of 3 yoga mats and a little bit. And they told us to sit down. And Keith with his broken ribs, poor thing. And he was pale. I remember what I saw looking at Keith, but because, I couldn't see myself. But I always say that if there was a camera in that room, little, if you can call it a room or whatever, we would have been out the day after. We were so frightened. They were so brutal. It was just the worst moments of my life. So we sat there, and one of the Hamas terrorists asked us some questions. Who are we? What are our names? Where do we come from? And then a couple of minutes later, walks in somebody that I didn't recognize because he's grown. I haven't seen him for a couple of years. And then he tells us his name. And he's from Kfar Aza. And I know him. But he was full of blood from here all the way down. His feet, he wore like shorts, and his feet and everything was just blood. I remember the smell of his blood. I got up and I gave him a hug. And then I held his hand and I told him that I'm going to look after him while I'm with him, because he looked like he was in a complete and utterly shock. And that's what I mean, that I'm sure that I looked the same. But I didn't feel myself, I felt for them. And there I have him, full of blood, Keith with his broken ribs and bleeding from being shot on his hand. And then walks in a family, a mother and 3 children. The children are 9, 11, and 17. And the same thing, he tells them to sit. The mother can't sit. And she's walking like 2 steps and turning around 2 steps because it's very small. And then she says, they killed my daughter. They killed my husband. They killed my daughter. They killed my husband. And I looked at her and I said, maybe they're not dead. The ambulance will come and take them. And she said, no, Aviva, my daughter fainted. They told me to wake her up. And she didn't. I tried. She didn't wake up. And they just shot her. They shot the father that tried to protect the family and the daughter that fainted. And that's how they came in. So the girl that was 17, she's 18 now, her name is Agam, it's Mishpachat Goldstein, and she was whiter than the wall. And wow, it was just, they were shot, so they had blood all over and everything. It was just, it's a pity that, I'm telling you about what I saw, but I know that you can try and imagine, but it's not like really being there. looking at the Hamas terrorists that they're happy and smiling while we just don't understand what we're doing there with our pajamas and in a complete and utterly shock, full of blood. We've gone through hell and we've just gone through, not even an hour. But I, at that minute, said to myself something that helped me all the time that I was in Gaza. You're going to go through things and it's going to be difficult. Just prepare yourself for worse. And I think that was one of the sentences that I repeated in my head all the time that helped me so much to go through harder things.
That took a lot of fortitude, and I was wondering how you made it through. After seeing all of these atrocities right in front of you, or hearing about them happening fresh, right immediately just before seeing people who were injured or who were emotionally injured, did just telling yourself, reminding yourself that you have to get more and more prepared, it sounded like you kind of increasingly strengthened yourself, seeing firsthand how it could just get worse. So it sounds like you kind of really, not really catastrophized, but you really just thought it could get much worse because this is already worse than I expected.
Yeah.
And so did just talking to yourself help, or what else helped you get through that?
Yeah. So then they handcuffed this boy that came from Gaza with some plastic, like, yeah. And after a couple of hours, he comes and he says, okay, I'm going to open it. And he took like a cutter and he cut the plastic. But with the plastic, he cut his hand. And I'll never forget that scream that he screamed because it was so sore, And then I said to myself, why? Why in earth would he do that? But he did that on purpose because he smiled. And that's the kind of people I was with. And that's the kind of people that Keith and the girls that were with us and all the hostages are still with.
Right. So this took place for you for another 50 days, a long time. And I'm wondering if during that time, if you knew that people like us were out there thinking about you, talking about you, that the governments were talking, like what was going, did you think you were totally alone and forgotten? Or did you have some hope that outside there might be some pressures pulling you out of this abyss?
So, I'm sorry, I didn't think about anybody. But I think I must have been there for a couple of days, and then it hit me thinking about first of all, I was sure that my son was killed. So I was sure, 100% that my son is killed because he has this dog, and I heard from the boy that was full of blood that some of the blood was the dog's blood. So I said to myself, if they kill my son Shai's dog, he's gonna scream at them, and they're just gonna kill him. So I was sure that he was dead. But after a couple of days, I thought about my grandson that time was 5 years old, and I tried to imagine myself like sitting and giving him a hug. And I started crying. And I felt so upset, and I promised myself, I'm not going to talk, I'm not going to think about my family at all, because it broke me up into pieces. For me to think about them, worrying and worried about Keith and I, broke my heart, and I didn't let myself. I just didn't let myself. So, and in Gaza, I thought that I was forgotten. I thought that I would die. And there were so many minutes that I just wanted to die, seeing what happened, because the worst for me is when they tortured Keith and when they tortured the girls. It was too much for me to handle. And, like I said, I could see, when we arrived, I could see Keith, the way he reacted to what he's going through, and the kids, and the mother, and the boy that was with us, but I didn't see what I looked like. And when I saw them torture Keith and the girls, and I saw their reaction, it broke my heart. It was worse than when they tortured me.
I don't really know what to say that can comfort you, except I'm sorry that this happened to you. Very intense. To be a witness can sometimes be as harsh as being the actual victim. In our talk now, just in the last few minutes now, I want to actually transition into a different area, which is how can we stop this situation? How can we have the hostages freed? What do you think has been effective so far? And then maybe you can talk also about what you think would be effective next.
Okay, but can I tell you a couple of things that happened there in Gaza? And then, okay, time me 2 minutes. Huh? Okay, good. Okay, so I'm a witness of one of the girls that was touched. And I'll never forget when she came into the room, she was shaking. And I looked at her, and I got up and gave her a hug. And I knew that I wasn't allowed to. And the Hamas terrorist came in and he started screaming at us. What are we doing? Because we weren't allowed to hug. We weren't allowed to do anything. The only thing that I could decide to do for myself is how many times I turn when I'm lying down, or how many times I blink, because we weren't allowed to do anything.
Wait, so you couldn't even talk?
No, most of the time we had to keep silence. And one of the times, I'll finish with the girl first. So anyway, I hugged her, and then it was very quiet in the room. And after a couple of hours, she came and she told me that he touched her. And I was just shocked. We were all shocked. We were all so upset. And to think about that she stayed in the same house, in the same room, with this Hamas terrorist that did that, and had to show him that everything's okay, that nothing happened. She had to continue smiling as if nothing happened, and I was so proud of her. And then I'm a witness of one of the girls that was beaten up into pieces because they thought that she was lying, and they hit her. They covered her with a blanket and handcuffed her. And when she came back, she was completely and utterly red. Her hair was standing. And they hit her and beat her so badly that I wanted to scream. And when she came back, she sat down like a little child on the floor. And she was just like shaking and crying while I couldn't get up and give her a hug. The only thing that I could do is give her love in the eyes. And one of the days, one of the girls was told to come and sit further away from us. We were sitting on mattresses, and we didn't understand why. And he told her just to sit. And I remember that we couldn't say anything because we had to keep quiet, but we were just staring at each other and trying to figure out what are they going to do, if they're going to take her, if they rape her, or should they going to separate us. And then after maybe a half an hour, he told her that she can come back to us. And she came straight into my arms for me to give her a hug. And we couldn't stop ourselves from crying, even though we weren't allowed to cry. But we both cried like babies. And we just loved each other already, being together in a situation like that. And that's what we did together with each other. They took Keith one of the days and shaved him looking like an Arab, and shaved underneath his arms, and told him that he needs to shave his whole body. And when he came out of the bathroom, he was just so sad, the saddest person in earth, because he just sat there. And this terrorist did what he wanted, whatever he wanted. And that's what they did. And he wanted to cry while I wanted to cry. And the terrorist just made a joke out of him and started laughing. And if it was, I was lying and I took my foot out the blanket because I was hot. And he screamed at me that I'm not allowed to do that. And these are small things, but everything was taken away from us. We weren't allowed to feel. We weren't allowed to move. We weren't allowed to stand. We weren't allowed to go to the bathroom for more than a second, even though sometimes we needed to. They used to sit us next to the wall in the middle of the night and smile and just look at us while we had to sit and wait. And we just wanted to lie down. And I had an infection in my stomach for most of the time I was in Gaza. And we didn't get water. And we were starved while they ate in front of us. And one of the times, they took us down underneath the ground. And for the first 2 hours, the 2 Hamas terrorists were with us because they were talking and talking. And then suddenly, we looked at each other and I said to Keith, what, do you think they've gone? They've left us here? They left us underneath the ground, 40 meters, without food, without water, and they left us there to die. I'm lucky to be sitting here and to be talking to you because there was no oxygen, and that's why they left us. And at some stage, Keith said to me that he feels that he can't breathe. And he was... And I was scared to look at his chest going up and down because I was scared that I'd see him dead. And I remember like telling him, Keith, just lie down and try and breathe. And that's what we did. We just tried to breathe to keep ourselves alive. And when we came out of that tunnel, at the end, after more than a couple of days, I was sure that I and Keith are going to die. And I'll never forget that moment of breathing the air. It wasn't, I can't call it fresh air because the air wasn't fresh, but like standing and breathing the air into my lungs and felt like the luckiest person in earth that I have air. I've got many, I can talk for hours, so you're going to have to stop me.
Sure. I'm just going to look to Matan about scheduling issues. How much time do we really have? A few more minutes. Sure. Sure. So maybe a little bit more of the stories, but then we also want to hear what we can do beyond this. So I think these stories are so compelling. So maybe a little bit of this, and then turn the page, because we want to help you also. We want to help the other hostages now to get out of this situation.
To tell you.
Yeah.
I'll tell you 2 more stories that I think that just that you can imagine what people like me are went through and what the hostages are still going through. While we were sitting and waiting to go out the last day, sat next to me 2 children, one 8 and one 15. And the girl that's 15, her name is Dafna. She's from Kibbutz Nahal Oz, and her sister Ela. And she looked at me and she said, I'll never forget when they connected my sister's finger. It was disconnected. They took her to a vet, and they didn't put any anesthetic in her sister's finger. And she said to me, I'll never forget my sister screaming. And then they brought this old lady, and I didn't know who she was. And I was scared to turn around until a Hamas terrorist told me, does anybody know English? And I said that I do. And he asked me to tell her to pick her head up. So I turned around and I told her to pick her head up. And she couldn't hear me. So I asked them to bring her and to sit her next to me. And they did. And I took her head to pick her head up, and I felt that she was cold, very cold. So I asked for a blanket. And luckily they brought a blanket, and I started massaging her body and massaging and massaging. And I gave her some sips of water, and I saw that she's alive. She only blinked, and she couldn't even pick her head up. So I took the blanket and I put it like that she'd hold a little bit that she could breathe. And I was massaging her, and I was telling her all the time that she needs to keep alive for children that are waiting for 51 days. And she blinked, and she's the strongest lady that I've ever met in my life. She's Elma. She's 84 years old. She came out of Gaza with a body temperature of 28 degrees, and they gave her 2 dates a day. She lost half of her body weight, and she's 84 years old. Her feet were purple and blue, and it was just, I don't know how. I can't call them people. I just don't understand how they treated her like that, and how they treated Keith and me and the girls. And I just can't believe it that I'm talking and talking for more than a year already. I've been back for a year and a week and a half. And these stories are hard, and we've got people that we love that are still there underneath the ground. We have to take them out.
And so, do you know of, well, what are the effective measures that have worked? Obviously, what has worked to free the hostages? One thing we know is last November 2023, there was the hostage deal, and I think it was 100 hostages were freed at that time. And then the talks broke down, as some of us or all of us might know. That was an effective method. Where do you think we go from here? I mean, what can the governments do, and what can we do, especially? Because you have a crowd here, and you have crowds that are following you.
I'm going to let Ratan answer that, but I can just say that if we don't get them out, we're going to get them out dead.
Yeah, we could, yeah. Maybe I'm going to ask, instead of that being the last thing that you say in this interview, because we're just about to go into questions and answers, so please think of things that you want to ask Aviva. I guess I'm going to ask you too, what, after your release, how did your view of Israeli society change? How did your view also of Palestinians, Gazans change?
Well, you know, at the beginning when I came back, I was shocked what happened. I didn't know anything. So I was overwhelmed. It was, you know, everybody just wanted to hug me, and everybody just wanted to help me in every way. And, you know, all the people all over the world that I've been to United States. This is my ninth time. Everybody really wants to help. I think that we just have to be together at times like this, and it's important. Well, I haven't really come back. I'm still in Gaza. I'm still there with Keith. I'm still there with the girls that I was with, what they're going through, and this is what I do. I go and talk and talk. Normally I cry. I'm lucky that I didn't cry this time. And so I talk and cry, and that's what I've been doing since I've come back. But the first couple of days, I was the happiest in earth because they told me that Keith's going to come tomorrow, or Keith will come to Israel in a couple of days' time. And it just didn't happen. So at the beginning, it was like, you know, waiting, you know, maybe in another hour, they'll tell us that Keith's coming back. And then it became like weeks, and then it became months, and now it's became more than a year. So I'm fighting, really fighting, and doing everything that I can to bring them back. I'm shouting for Keith and for the hostages. And I just want to say one more thing, that maybe at the beginning I didn't say that because I didn't allow myself to think about it, but very shortly after I came back, I say it aloud, and I want everybody to hear, that I can't even think about mothers in Gaza having babies in tents. And I can't even think about older people in tents getting up from mattresses, and especially like seeing Keith when he was so weak, getting up from a mattress from the floor because that's where we were. And he fell because he was so weak, because we didn't get any food and we didn't get any water. And for me to think about all the good people that don't deserve to go through what they're going through breaks my heart. Just yesterday, in the news, it was told that there was somebody in Gaza that, in the Instagram, I think it went through the whole world, and he was shouting aloud that they've all had enough of Hamas that doesn't give them food and the way they're treating them. And all he wanted is better for his family, I'm sure, for his children, for his parents, for whatever. And yesterday in the news it was written that the Hamas terrorist killed him. And that broke my heart, because all he wants is what I want. And what I want and what Keith wants. We want peace, we want good. We want good for everybody that lives anywhere in this world. The world that we get is beautiful. But they change it into hate, the Hamas terrorists. All they do is hate. And it just doesn't seem right. It shouldn't be like that. We need the leaders of the world to understand that the evil can't win. And I'm sure that there's lots and lots of good people in Gaza are waiting just like us, Jews, all over the world, for this war to finish. It needs to stop.
Thank you. Let's leave that as the end of this kind of official interview. But we have more questions. So now you can actually interview Aviva with a question or two of your own. Jonathan, please.
Thank you so much for coming today, Aviva. So before October 7th, if I understand correctly, you could characterize the Israeli residents of Gaza as somewhat to the left of Israeli society, more supportive of a two-state solution, more supportive of Palestinian rights, whatever that might look like, more supportive of the rights of Arab Israelis, et cetera. How do you think that has, first of all, I don't know if you agree with my characterization, and secondly, how has that changed for you and the other residents of Israel Gaza since October 7th?
Well, all I can say that I'm not a politician. If I was a politician, I would scream for everything to stop and that life has to go back to itself for everybody. Israel is going through the hardest time ever. So many people aren't in their houses. They have to look for themselves. I haven't got a house to go back to. And Shai, my son, that is alive, because they didn't kill him, hasn't got a house to go back to. I just know that everybody deserves to have a better life.
Just to follow up, though, could you speak to the general political bent of the people in the Gaza envelope? Were they more progressive and open to working with, living with, dignity for Palestinians or Gazans?
You're talking about the Hamas terrorists that I made?
No. Before October 7th.
Like I said, I know that there's good people in Gaza that I'm sure that would love to come into Israel and work and have jobs and go back and have a decent life.
And we're also talking about the opposite, Hevech, were the Israelis also open-minded about and in favor of
I'm sure that there's people that would love to go and eat in Gaza because the food is different, or go to the sea. But, Israel has got enough for themselves. So I really don't know that. But I do know that there were years that people from Gaza came to work on Kfar Aza. And Keith even went to learn Arabic to talk to them. He used to come home from work, and I used to ask him, Keith, where are you? And he said, I was talking to Ahmed, that comes from Gaza to work on Kibbutz Kfar Aza. And talk in Arabic. And that's what Keith did, because he's that kind of person. He wanted to welcome the people that come from Gaza to work in Kfar Aza.
Thank you. Noah, please.
Toda. This was very moving and very important for us to hear. I've two questions. One, personal, if you can just talk about how and when you were separated from Keith. Was it just when you were released or before? And the other is, I know for myself that from the moment this started, I thought, just get them back home. And if getting the hostages back home would be the first priority, then we should never have even gone into Gaza. And I know that at the beginning, the families of the hostages were reluctant to speak up against the Netanyahu government. Can you talk a little bit about what's happening now and how the government has been treating you? Thank you.
Yeah, well, the hostage families are not connected to politics at all, but we need the politicians to help us get them out. So we've been talking to all the politicians that will hear us, and I've told my story to many of them to try and convince them that we need Keith and the hostages out before they kill them. Because what I went through was the worst thing that any human being in this world should go through. And Keith is still there, going through that. So the last day that I was with Keith was a different day. I'm not going to talk too much about it, but what I can say is that somebody came to me and said that I'm going to Israel. I was in a complete and utterly shock because I didn't even know that Israel exists, because they said that Israel does not exist anymore, that the whole world has bombed Israel and there's no Israel left. So I didn't know where I'm going or where I'm going to be taken. I just knew that I'm separated from Keith, and that's what went in my head. What are they going to do to me? If they're going to rape me or kill me or just, I don't know what, do with me. So when he came to me, I was in a different room than Keith, and I said to him that I'm not going anywhere without Keith. I'm staying here with Keith, or Keith is coming with me. And I argued with him until I understood that I have to get up. And I said to him, I'm going to Keith. And he said, no, you're not going to Keith. So I moved him with my hand, and I went to Keith, and I found him lying on a filthy, dirty mattress, looking at the ceiling just like what I did for 51 days. And he looked sad. And I bent down to him, and I gave him a hug. And I said to him, I think the most cleverest thing that I've ever said to anybody in my life. And I, when I think about it, how did I figure out what to say at that moment? It was the sadness in Keith's eyes. And I said to him, you be strong for me, and I'll be strong for you. Not knowing anything. And we haven't heard about Keith for a whole year. We don't know if he's alone. The only thing that we do know that they released a video in April, and Keith is crying. I don't know if anybody of you saw it. I haven't, because I just can't even think of seeing Keith, because I know what he feels. And he's crying in that video and begging to get out. And they came, the Hamas terrorists, to video me and Keith while I was there. And I said to Keith that I feel like I'm going to cry. And he said, no, Aviva, don't cry. Be strong. You need to be strong, because if your children see you, you want to show them that everything's okay. And after 8 months, when they did the video on Keith, he's crying. And I'm sure that there's nobody in this room that will want to handle anything that I'm going through. Worried about Keith. I'm sick. I'm just finished. But I'm screaming out aloud for them, for Keith, for all the hostages, for the girls that I was with, for all the people that are tortured, for the boys that were in cages and were tied with chains and couldn't move. And I just, first of all, do feel so lucky that I'm alive, because I think a couple of more hours underneath the ground, I wouldn't be sitting here.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Thanks for explaining what you've been through, so we have some understanding of it. And we are going to be emissaries of your story and supporters of you and Keith.
Thank you. Thank you. And just one more thing, I used to think before the 7th, how come all of you don't live in Israel? And now I understand. Just stay here and help, because it's the biggest help that we can ever even think about or imagine. All the Jews in the world, and not only the Jews, so many people are just trying to do everything they can to help us, and we really need your help. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. So we're going to transition a little bit to how we can help.
To speak from here?
Yes, that's
Okay,
fine.
I can. Okay. So, Aviva is just so remarkable and courageous, and since you came back, I think, as she mentioned, she came to the States for many, many, many times, and we all, we're just like the support team behind the scenes, the facilitators. And we feel so privileged working with you and her amazing family, truly amazing, that are going through so much except of the need of advocating days in and days out for their loved ones, but also they lost their community, their home. So this is why they need us, and we're trying to show up and to be there for them, and we'll be there for you until it ends. And we are very hopeful that it will end soon. Our job is to be optimistic. I will introduce myself. My name is Matan Sivek. I didn't do this a year and 3 months ago. And again, as it deworlded all of us, also my life has completely changed. And for a year plus now, I've been running the Hostage Families Forum here in DC and in general in the United States, together with an amazing, amazing, amazing group of people, super committed and dedicated. And our job is to make sure that no one forgets about this and them. And I think that our role as a community, and I know how powerful this community is, I've been living here for the past 5 years, is really to keep it top of mind. And how do you do that, right? It's very hard, and I want to talk a little bit about it. But before, I want to thank Laura, Ethan, and Rabbi Scott for hosting this. It's very important, and that's exactly what we should do now. This was a very, very difficult week. We heard the terrible news about Omer Nutra. Aviva, her family, and us, we've been working with the Nutra family for again, since October 7. And I just want to say here, and to underscore this, they're the most courageous, incredible, hardworking people. They've been everywhere advocating for their son. Didn't sleep, didn't rest. And I really want to acknowledge that and say, really, to just express my condolences and prayers. I just came back from their Shiva. And this is why, today we also had, we shared also in our WhatsApp groups the video of Matan Tsangauker, that Hamas released a video of him. And what I want to say by that is people are going through hell. And they need help, they need support. And how do we do that? So first, I would like to invite you tomorrow. We have our weekly gathering that will change every time we try to do something a little bit different. But tomorrow, we're going to come again to the National Mall. We're going to march with the families together. We're gonna have many different families tomorrow. So really, if you can join us, it will be extremely, extremely helpful. So I just want to mention the families that will be tomorrow as well for you to know. So we're gonna have the sister of Karina Ariev, Sasha. We're gonna have the brother of Naama Levi, Amit. Aviva will be there with us. We're gonna have the sister of Romi Gonen, Yarden. And we really, really want them to feel supported. So if you can come, it will be great. So this is 1 o'clock, yeah. Tomorrow, 1 o'clock, National Mall, Smithsonian Metro Station. So it will be easy for everyone to commute.
It takes 1 hour.
It takes...
But the whole thing is 1 hour.
Yeah, it's a 1 hour, it's a short march and a vigil. I know it's a little bit cold, so this is why, we're doing these kind of events as well. But it's nothing compared to what our brothers and sisters are going through. So this is first. The second, Ethan generously agreed to share with you a link to our WhatsApp groups, to our newsletters, so you can keep being updated with the hope that you won't need to be updated anymore very, very, very soon. So do that. The third thing is that just for you to keep in mind that this effort has been more than a year now. We planned that, when we started trying to help or figure out how we're gonna help, we thought it's gonna be 2 weeks, 3 weeks, maybe top. And here we find ourselves a year later. The families, they don't work, they have, like literally, they don't do anything besides advocating for their families. They need support, they need help. So anyone who wants to be supportive, please reach out. We're taking care of everything, of their travel, of their accommodation, their stay, their advocacy efforts. So please feel free to reach out. Your support and help is really needed. And that's it. And I just want to, like to conclude by saying that I hope that we will have a big celebration soon. I really every night that I go to sleep, I close my eyes, I imagine Keith coming back home, hugging Aviva, hugging Ilan and Shai and Shiren, and just imagining this moment really gives me hope and a reason to wake up the next day and fight and keep fighting for these wonderful, incredible people. Thank you.
I just want to say thank you to Matan and thank you to the forum. I don't know what we would have done without them. באמת, תודה.